So in Photoshop, a couple of things to notice. I've got this particular document opened up. You'll notice it looks a lot like Illustrator. As a matter of fact, many of the same things are going to be found in the same place and called the same thing. You got your toolbox, usually on the left-hand side with all the different tools inside of it. Remember, if you hover over a tool, you can always get the name of that tool and see what it is. And if you ever get a little arrow at the bottom corner of it, you can click and hold and get more tools that are usually related with each other. So if you can't find something, try hovering over it and finding the tool that you need. Whenever you select a tool, pay attention to what's up here at the top. You've got different tool options, and in Photoshop these change up a lot more than we had in Illustrator. Each tool has its own set of controls and things that you can change with it. So having the appropriate tool selected will be the first step in giving you the appropriate controls to work in. Of course, you do have your drop-down menus up here at the top, and you've got your palettes over here on the side. If you don't see a palette open or you need to find something, where do you go to find all of your palettes or your panels? Window. Window drop-down menu. As with the other one, if it's got a check, that means it's open somewhere, and if you need to open one that's not open, you simply select it and it should open up that palette as necessary. Also with the other ones, you can drag them off, resize them, reshape them, close them out as necessary, and there's also the little icons if you don't see the thing fully expanded. Oh, I clicked on something. Go away, go away. Okay. So that's kind of the quick tour of the layout of Photoshop. Very familiar with Illustrator as well, very similar. The workspace that you're working in, like I said, is only going to give you one page at a time. Now you can open multiple documents, but you can't have anything off here, off to the side, or have different sizes within it. I can really only have one image. In Photoshop, it's either called an artboard or a canvas. I'll use those kind of interchangeably. And everything that you create stays within this particular side. As a matter of fact, if I tried to move something off, let's say I took the words aftermath and I moved it off the edge, you can't even see it off of the edge here. A lot of times students will make something or move something and they'll move it completely off the edge and then they can't find it. And like, oh, it's on there somewhere. What's happening is it's hiding off to the side, and we need to just be able to move it back into place as well. The most important panel to have open, it will be your layers panel. The layers are going to show you everything that's on your document. Just as in Photoshop, whenever you create an object, they had layers, but in Photoshop, layers are very important because everything has its own layer, and each layer is a different kind of object that you can work with. Some of them will be nested inside of each other. What I'm going to show you today is the different kinds of layers and what you can do with them as you create a new document. So let's close this out. We won't save it. When you download your files from the book page, it'll be in a folder called Movie. And they're going to give you a variety of different pictures we're going to work within. Some bricks, some lightning bolts. They're even giving you some vector files. So there's an Adobe Illustrator file and some other different things to work with as well. What they need you to do is to load each one of these into Photoshop. So let's talk about making a new document. The Photoshop icon, if you didn't know, is the blue one with the PS down at the bottom. To make a new document, we can go to File and New. And as with Illustrator, the first thing it needs to know is what size do you want to be able to make it. Pay attention to not just the width and the height, but also what measurement you're working in. If I'm working with something on the screen, pixels is good, but if I need to work in inches, I can change it up and work from it from here as well. Let's do an 8 by 10. The resolution, so this is the number of pixels per inch that you have. Remember what I said, the higher the number that you have, the better the quality image that we'll be able to print or display. Lower number, of course you'll have a lower file size, but it'll also be a bad resolution. 72 to 100, that's good for screen. If I wanted this to be printed off, I would do something closer to 300 as well. You also have your different color modes that you can work within. Now, Illustrator only had RGB and CMYK. Hey, which one's good for printing? CMYK. Why is CMYK? What does that stand for? What does that mean? Cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Those are our printer colors that we're working with. So if I wanted to make something to be printed, that's what I would choose as well. Photoshop can handle some different kinds of things, grayscaling, just working in black and white. We really won't be using any of these other ones. We're just going to stay within these color ranges to work with. And I won't worry with the rest of those. Let's say, okay, here's our document that we have. Got my document set up. Check out my layers panel. Whenever you create a new document, you always need to have at least one layer. You got to have something that's on there. By default, that first layer is called your background layer. And you can see that it's locked down. By locked, this means if I try to move it, it's going to give me an error saying, hey, you can't move it because the layer is locked. Now I can do things like grab my paintbrush tool. I did a demo over the weekend on how to make your own brushes. Made one out of my name. If I can grab my paintbrush tool, I can add to it and change it up. But some things about it you can't do. You can make new layers on top of it. If you look at your bottom of your layers panel, so here's several different icons. This is our new layer. Looks the same as in Illustrator. And when I make a new one, you can see it'll give it the default name of layer 1. And if you ever see a checkered pattern, that means it's transparent. Here's the fun thing about working in these layers. If I paint something now in layer 1, and I go to move it around, it's only in layer 1 that I'm working in. If I need to delete a layer, it's simply a matter of selecting it and closing and hitting delete or hitting my delete key. I'm going to turn off these for now and show you what those do. So let's see, next thing. In Photoshop, we also don't have any guidelines automatically or bleed lines. In Illustrator, what do the bleed lines do? These were those red lines that go outside of your document edge. Going off your artboard. What's the purpose of going off the artboard? Why do we want to do that?
So when you print, you can ensure that there's not going to be a border on what you're printing is going to go from edge to edge.
Edge to edge, bingo, exactly. The bleed edge, when you print it, it allows you to crop off and cut off those edges so you can print all the way to the edge. Photoshop doesn't have bleed edges. You actually have to create your own guidelines and make your own artboard to be big enough to incorporate bleed edge. One of the first things that you're going to have to do is to set up these kind of guidelines. I'm going to show you really quickly how to do this. The first and easiest way is to use your rulers at the top and bottom. If you don't see your rulers, you can always go to View. There's Rulers. It's already checked off, so there it is turned off. I can turn it on. Command R is a good keyboard shortcut to remember. But if I want to make a guideline, I can click on any of the rulers and drag. In this case, a horizontal. I clicked on the horizontal ruler and dragged to it. You can see my cursor, it gives me a Y coordinates. So if I want it to be right at ½ of an inch, it's pretty close right there. And I let go, I get a blue guideline. I could do the same thing for a vertical one. There it is right at ½ an inch there as well. Another way you can make guidelines is to tell it specifically exactly where you want it to go. Like this one was off by a little bit. If you go to View, you can create new guidelines. Tell it what kind of guide you want to make. So if I wanted a horizontal one to be exactly at 0.25, ½ of an inch. Say OK, you can see it'll make the guidelines exactly where I want to go from there. So making guidelines comes in handy, especially if you want to make your bleed edge and make your own margins to work with. Here's another great tip. I want to zoom in. Command and plus sign does that. Y'all look at the very top corner that I have here. By default, your ruler is set to the 0 point at the top left edge of your document. You can actually move around the starting point of your rulers. If you click on the intersection between the two and drag, I get my little crosshair and I can place this crosshair wherever I want it to go. If I wanted this to be my starting point. When I let go, you can now see I've got a 0 point right there. And I can drag it wherever I want. This comes in handy if I ever need to make a guide or a line that's relative to some other point. So if I drag it to here and I wanted it to be a ½ of an inch away from here, this guideline, I could drag that and place it exactly, almost exactly right there. And there's my 1/4 of an inch. If I double click the little corner piece, it'll reset and bring it back up to there as well. The book is going to ask you to reset and move things around. That's where you're going to be able to find the ability to move your rulers. All cool? Any questions on rulers? Setting it up? Looks really boring, but it comes in handy whenever you need to create those. So let's actually play around with putting images into our document and opening up a document. One way you can open up an image, especially if it's a JPEG, notice if I double click, it's not going to open up in Photoshop. This is another problem. What program is opening up? Preview. It's not going to open automatically in Photoshop. You can drag your image down to the Photoshop icon. Y'all got a question? Okay. Down to the Photoshop icon, it will open up in Photoshop. Notice that these two are nested together. If I wanted to see both of them, I can drag it off. Now I can see both of these at the same time. The tool that I'm using is my Move tool. It looks like a little cross of arrows. And I can move this one by clicking and dragging it into my document. I'm glad this actually came up. The profile mismatch. What this is saying is the colors on this one are going to be slightly different from this one. This may come up for yours as well. What's happening is one of the later projects is going to ask you to change your color profile, and we never change it back. So what's happening is we didn't revert Photoshop back. I'm going to hit cancel. If this ever comes up, here's kind of a sideline. You may want to take a note on this. Here's how to fix it. I'm going to go to Edit, my color settings, and let's change this back to, it's already North American General Purpose. Let's do it for this one. North American General Purpose. Hey, should have been done okay. Let's try it again. Okay, if it ever comes up, just say okay. It should still work out just fine. I drug one image into another document by itself. Notice now what I got. I got another layer. And I can move it around as necessary. Again, I'm using my Move tool to be able to do that. If I need to rename a layer, I can double click on the name of it. We'll call it bricks. And there the layer is named that way as well. So that's one way of doing it. You can open up your images, use your Move tool to drag it in there. Another way of doing it is to place your image within an area. Let's do the same for the lightning image. In Photoshop, I can go to File and down to, there's two different ways of placing. They both do kind of the same thing. We'll do Place Embed. And this is going to ask me to find my picture. So I know I've got it on the desktop, in my movie folder, and I choose my lightning picture, and we'll hit Place. Here's the difference between placing an image and just dragging it into here. I've got a little X that's running through my image. Whenever you place something, it's going to ask you to do a transformation or to tell it what size you want it to be. At this time, I can make it whatever size that I want. I could even rotate it, or I can do any kind of transformation that I normally do. But before I can move on, before I can click on any other layer or do anything else, I have to tell Photoshop to commit to that transformation. Here's where to do that. There's a little checkbox at the very top, and if I hit the check, it'll commit to that transformation. Now I can keep moving on to do other stuff. Oftentimes, if you forget to commit to it, you can't move on, and it's like, oh, Photoshop's not working. Well, what's happening is it's waiting for you to say that what you've done is okay, to lock in that transformation. Also notice in my layers, it's got its own layer, and it automatically named that layer the name of my file that I was working in, so I didn't have to rename that. It also created what's called this smart object. I'll show you what that does in just a second. So we can place images, we can drag them from one layer to another. Another way you can do it is, let's say I took the storm JPEG, without even opening it in Photoshop. I can take this JPEG, drag it onto my file, give it just a second, and it will also automatically place it in there as well. Now I've got my cross going through there, so I need to commit to that transformation. It's got its own layer, and that works. Here's the final way of placing an image into your document. We can actually select the pixels and copy and paste it. That's what we're going to do with the skyline image. I'm going to drag this into Photoshop, open it up through here. With this one, you can select just the pixels or just the part of the image that you want to copy and paste into your document. In this case, I don't want all of the buildings. I'm going to use my selection tools, and they're called your Marquee tools. Next class, I'll talk more about the lasso tools and the other kind of selection tools. But the Marquee tools, there's rectangular and elliptical, allow you to click and drag over an area and select exactly what you want. You can see why it's called a marquee. It looks like little marching ants of lights that go around your particular area. If you click inside of it, you can move that selected area around, but this is telling Photoshop to look at just those pixels. I can then go to Edit and Copy, jump into my original document, and when I paste, it's going to give me the color profile warning. We'll say OK. You can see it's now pasted into my document. It's got its own layer by itself. We'll rename that one City. There's nothing special about naming these. It's just a habit that I get into so I can keep up with it. I can then move it around, continue making edits as necessary. Any questions on moving things around? Thing you want to see again? Okay, here's the final thing. Talking about working within your layers. By default, you need to be aware of what layer you have selected in order to move things around. I've got city selected, so I can actually click on the city and move it. But let's say I wanted to see my stormy clouds. Well, since it's below it, I need to be able to drag it on top of my city layer. So I can select it, click and drag until it's highlighted and above it. And now I've changed the stacking order of this one. Select lightning, I can even put that one on top of everything else. Everything follows this particular stacking order. You do have your little eyeball icon, so I can turn on and off the visibility of whatever layer, and that comes in handy every once in a while. But let's say I wanted to select the city now. I've got my move tool, my selection tool. If I was to click and drag, hey, I clicked on the city picture, but it's dragging the lightning. Why is it doing that? Check out what layer I actually have selected. I've got the lightning layer selected even though I'm clicking on another picture. By default, Photoshop is still only going to select the layer or affect the layer that you have selected. I would have to select the city layer, then be able to click on it and drag. So paying attention to which layer you have selected is one of the first things to get used to in Photoshop. Here's a good tip to know. With your Move tool selected, if you turn on Auto Select at the very top of your control panel, this will automatically select whatever layer of the object you're clicking on. Notice I've got City, but if I click on my lightning, it quickly jumps to lightning and I can move it around. If I click on the sky, the storm, it'll automatically select this way. This comes in handy if you want to quickly and easily select and move things around. Sometimes it does get in the way, but usually I keep that selected to change up and move around as well. So that's selecting, moving, changing up your layers. Again, if you need to erase something away, you can click the little trash can, say OK to that, and that'll get rid of a layer. Final thing I want to show you concerns smart objects and placing vector images into Photoshop. So this is my Tantum, let's do the rating one. So this is my rating logo. It's solid white, so you can't really see it. Actually, let's work with the title, because I know I can see the title of it. If I was to open up the title in Photoshop, by the way, another way you can open things is go to File and Open. So I'll choose this Illustrator file, this vector file. Photoshop is going to ask me to rasterize my vector image, turn it into pixels, and this is the options that it gives me when I do that. Some of the things I can do is to tell it what size that I want it to be, what resolution I want it to be. I can even crop it if there's different kinds of cropping available to it. So if I wanted this to be exactly, we'll constrain the proportion 10 inches wide, it'll also update the height. When I say OK, it'll open up my image in its own layer, and there's my title that I can work with. Hey, there's that checkerboard pattern. This simply means that it's nice and transparent. The white is the actual pixels that I'm working with. So now if I wanted to put the title excuse me, into here, I could drag that layer into my document. Of course, I would need to resize it. I'll talk about resizing and transforming once we get into that. If I was to place the other images into here, we won't save that. Let's put the Tantamount logo. I'll drag this one directly into here. Again, it's going to ask me to open it as in this case it'll be what's called a smart object. And we'll say okay. Give it a second to think about it. Excuse me. Get used to seeing the little spinny beach ball icon. What's doing is it's taking a lot of time to re-vectorize this. Usually it doesn't take this amount of time. Jimmo? Jimmo? Oh, don't you lock up on me. Not in the middle of class. Did it work? Did it do anything? It went away. Try again. Going on to here, saying okay. There it is. Awesome. Drug it into here. Of course, I need to resize it. So this is like the little movie logo that's on there. And it's got its own specific layer that it works on. There's a little extra icon inside of my layer, and this tells me that it's what's called a smart object. Long story short, smart objects allow you to save a copy of this layer. In this case, it's still a vector file, and I can edit that copy rather than having to edit the layer itself. Here's what I mean by that. So this is a vector file. If I wanted to edit this layer, I've actually got to open it in Illustrator. I've got to use the vector to change it. Got it selected, and go to my layer options, and we're going to edit the contents of this layer. This is going to say, hey, when you're done, be sure to save it. We'll say okay. And let's say I wanted to make this logo, instead of it being white, we'll fill it in and turn it red. Again, right now it's white, but when I save this document, I'm in Illustrator, and I jump back into Photoshop, automatically it updates my Photoshop document because I edited the copy of it. I edited the smart object of it as well. The best thing about this, if I have a object and I have multiple copies of it, let's say I made several copies of this one. If I was to edit the Tantamount image anyway, let's choose one of them. We'll jump back into Illustrator. Let's say my art director says, hey, I don't want it red, let's make it green. So we'll select it, turn it to green. When I save my document in Illustrator, jump back into Photoshop, all of my copies are automatically updated as well. It's not just the one layer, it's the same copy of that file that I changed and updated with that changes it up. Does that kind of make sense? I know I kind of stumbled through that to show you. But that's what it's allowing you to do. The smart object is simply saving a copy of it versus the layer. If I wanted to edit the aftermath, well, I can't open that up in Illustrator and make a change to it. I actually have to change this particular layer. And it's very difficult to change the color once it's already set. Not that you can't do it. Okay, so those are created. The final thing, we're not going to actually use this for this project, but you can add type and you can add other kinds of objects to there. There is a type tool. I closed out my layers window. And if I wanted to add type to this, type will have its own specific kind of layer, and that's what we'll use for another project once we get into those as well. All right, rest of this time I'm going to turn your computer back over to y'all and let you continue or get started working on this. If you have it already, don't forget you need to download